Welcome back, Canonites, for another Halo the Series episode breakdown. As usual, I'll be listing off all the Easter eggs and references to the core canon, aka the lore and story of the games, books, and most other Halo media. And as always, these comparisons are not to be considered criticisms unless specified. Now, before we dive into this week, I wanted to talk about a few brief subjects concerning past episodes. First, it was suggested to me that the coin we see John flipping in the Silver timeline, which has a UNSC Eagle on one side and the UNSC Navy logo on the other, might be a Naval Challenge coin. If true, that would be a rather cool update for the Silver timeline. Second, David J. Peterson, one of the gentlemen who developed the Sangheili language for the TV series, alongside Carl Buck, has been posting the Sangheili spoken in each episode along with their translations. And included in the notes for episode 5 was the name of the brute who Chief faced in the previous episode, Atriox. For anyone interested in those scripts, I've left a link in the description box below. It's fascinating stuff. And with that, we can dive into our latest episode. Episode 6 opens aboard Halsey's ship, Endymion 2, on its way back to Reach. As memories flash through John's mind, he again turns an angry eye towards Halsey. Next to her, we can see a health pack almost right out of Halo CE. This version, though, looks like it was based off a cut health pack model from Halo 3. Suddenly, we cut to the medical wing as Kai-125 and others injured in the previous episode are being treated. Kai is visibly in a great deal of pain, a pain I can only imagine if Silver Timeline Spartan 2s have the same pain thresholds as their core canon counterparts. Nearby, Miranda records the Sangheili mutterings of a sleeping Maquis. We learn from Captain Keyes that Maquis claims to have been a Covenant captive for years. As the Endymion 2 approaches Reach, we're told that the hospital ship Solace, sharing its name with the episode's title, is on standby. While the Solace has no direct core canon counterpart, medical and hospital ships, such as the UNSC Hopeful or Medical Facility Endurance, do exist. Once landed, as everyone else focuses on moving the wounded, John decides to test the limits of Cortana's control over him. And to do this, he locks Dr. Halsey in her lab aboard the Endymion and activates the UV decontamination system, making Cortana, Halsey, and I'd argue even the audience think he's actually about to kill the Doctor. Sure, there was no way that she was going to die, but I really wasn't sure if John was going to be the one to stop himself or not. We also get a small bit of lore dump during this, John talking about a human engineer named Roman Quinn who, quote, modernized the entire fleet, and ended up dying when automatic sensors in his lab failed, dosing the man with lethal amounts of UV radiation. While this is entirely new to the Silver timeline, it might be a reference to something from the core canon. In core canon, there was once a Halcyon-class cruiser, the same class of ship as the Pillar of Autumn, named the Roman Blue. Once commanded by future Admiral Terrence Hood, the ship was shot down during the Human Covenant War, landing on a tidally locked moon known as Eero. There, it would have been dosed with solar radiation for years. It might be a stretch connecting this ship to this Roman Quinn character, but I had to mention it. Anyway, John ultimately pulls Halsey out before decontamination begins, though literally just as it's about to. During this scene, we also learn that Cortana doesn't have full control of John, she can merely put him into a form of stasis briefly. As a quick aside, the door to Halsey's lab here, H7, might be a 7 reference. For any unaware, Bungie, the creators of Halo, have always had an obsession with the number 7, references to the number finding their way into many Bungie titles. Halo was no exception, and the 7 reference has continued since. After the opening, we find Maquis being examined by UNSC personnel, while the news shows Reach's weather forecast. The news also talks about an Equinox festival, likely a celebration local to Reach. To my knowledge, no such holiday is known to exist in the core canon. We see that Maquis is being kept in room 316, which could be a biblical John 3:16 reference. That passage reads, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life." You could almost consider Maquis and Mercy's relationship a perversion of this line, Mercy being God and Maquis being, quote, the Son. Mercy then, quote unquote, giving up Maquis to ensure the success of the Great Journey, aka the promise of eternal life. Less God giving up his son, or daughter in this case, and more God sending out a sacrificial lamb. That's my interpretation at least. Meanwhile, Admiral Perengoski and Captain Keyes meet with a few civilian members of the UNSC's Security Committee, reviewing the recent Eridanus II incident. As they do, we can see an image of the excavation site from the last episode, along with several icons, including the logo for the Corbulo Academy of Military Science, and a symbol similar to Noble Team's logo. We also see a couple red icons, likely indicating where Covenant forces dropped in. Following a discussion of events, we find that the committee is concerned about the recent behavior of the Master Chief, and it's revealed that Admiral Hood himself is considering dismantling ONI Section 3 and putting the Spartans under direct UNSC command. And so, as we'll see in just a bit, Parangoski is going to have to pull a Kilo 5 a bit early and make Halsey take the fall for the Spartan program. If you don't get that reference, don't worry, we'll talk about that in just a bit. In the meantime, John meets with Maquis for the first time since returning from Aridness. On his way in, an MP makes clear the doubts he and everyone has about Maquis, noting that
these squid heads don't take hostages.
Which is absolutely true of the core canon. Squidhead, by the way, is an insult for elites or Sangheili. John and Maquis talk a bit, Maquis trying to get the UNSC to go after the artifact that was taken from Aridness 2. She tells John that it's been taken to a world in the Aspero system, another element pulled from the Kilo 5 books, which in core canon is home to a Sangheili colony called Hesduros. A part of the world's population would eventually make up the basis for Julum Dama's Covenant faction, the one we fight in Halos 4 and 5. That planet also held coordinates for Requiem, home of the Didact. In the Silver timeline, Hesduros, at least according to Maquis, is considered a holy place for the Covenant, while core canon Hesduros is mainly inhabited by Sangheili, who generally enjoy a little isolation. As John and Maquis talk, the cinematography initially shows John behind these bars, representing the literal and metaphorical restraints on him. On the other hand, Maquis is shown in an open space, as if offering John freedom from his cage. Asking why he should believe anything she has to say, Maquis reveals herself to be the Covenant's Blessed One, causing even more anxiety for John. Informing Captain Keyes of the new intel, the UNSC goes to work to try and find the planet Maquis mentioned. As Keyes gives orders, we hear one analyst mention that he's tasking Sigma Octantis 4 satellites for the job. I've mentioned Sigma Octantis 4 more than a few times by now, the planet having major significance in core canon. It was where Jacob Keyes was promoted to captain and where the UNSC found its first hints to Halo. Like its core canon version, Sigma Octantis 4 has one moon, High Point. In another scene, we can see people looking at the Beta Hydri system containing the planet Beta Hydri 4. Both are mentioned in Dr. Halsey's personal journal, though that's about it for core canon. A later screen shows several real-world star systems, including Alpha Centauri and Bernard Star. As the scene comes to an end, we spot information behind Keyes regarding several UNSC Sahara-class heavy prowlers, identifiable by their distinct tail. On the right here, we can see what looks like UNSC Glamorgan, which would be named for a county in Wales. Next to it is the UNSC Mirthless Smile, and neither have appeared in core canon before, to my knowledge. However, we additionally have the UNSC Silent Joe and Port Stanley, which are from core canon. The Port Stanley was notably captained by future head of ONI and former Spartan 2, Saren Osman, back when she led a post-war Black Ops team known as Kilo 5. The Silent Joe appeared in the slightly more recent Halo Retribution, where it briefly served as a transport for Blue Team. As that's happening, Dr. Halsey is forced to sit down for an interview of sorts about her work, though as we're informed later, the scope of the inquiry is limited to her genetics research and cloning. As I mentioned before, this plot point, using Halsey as a scapegoat for the Spartan 2 program, is pulled straight out of the Kilo 5 trilogy of books. Comprised of Halo's Glasslands, The Thursday War, and Mortal Dictata, these were the first full novels to dive into the lore of the Halo universe after the conclusion of the Covenant War. While there's obviously a lot to these books, one of the subplots has to do with the Spartan 2 program and Dr. Halsey. Having been declared KIA during the fall of Reach, Admiral Parangoski and Admiral Osman after her would keep Halsey locked up to keep her working, though she would remain dead to the public. And if the Spartan 2 program ever became public, it would all be put on Halsey's head. Back to the show, however, Halsey is interviewed here by Major Ira Halal, a character from the novel Halo Last Light, a book whose events were caused by seemingly minor events from the Kilo 5 books. Last Light was written by author Troy Denning, who also wrote Halo Retribution. In Last Light, Halal was again a representative for the UNSC Judge Advocate General's Corps, though explaining his precise role in that book would take a while. As the interview or interrogation goes on, we find that Captain Keyes and Admiral Perengoski are watching in via some neural tech that, to my knowledge, has never appeared in core canon before. It feels very Oni, though. Before the interview gets too far, however, John interrupts, and when John requests the room, Halal barely argues. Keyes almost immediately tries to stop the interaction, but Perengoski stops him, wanting to avoid looking complicit with Halsey in the Chief's eyes. John sits down and asks for the truth, and Halsey delivers, admitting to the kidnapping, telling him about the clones that would die off, even getting into her reasons for the Spartan 2 program, which largely align with the core canon.
My Spartans are humanity's next step, our destiny as a species.
As this happens, Perengoski invites Miranda to listen in, revealing to her the truth of the Spartans. As their talk goes on, John asks whether anyone else was complicit, to which Halsey responds,
"When you're fighting an existential war, people don't ask too many questions."
On the surface, that sounds like Spartans were created to fight the Covenant, and that might be what Halsey is going for with this response. In truth, however, the Spartan 2s were created to crush human rebellion, a conflict which Oni projected could cost billions of lives and result in a new dark age for humanity. I'm curious if the TV show will get into that aspect of the program eventually. Hopefully. As their talks wind down, Halsey tries to convince John that he needs her to, quote, finish what they started, but John walks out. He soon runs into Miranda, informing her of what Maquis told him and asking her to check it out. While she does, John is overwhelmed by more memories, these including images of the Spartans who died during the augmentation process. Cortana soon appears, causing John to ask who she works for, him or Halsey. She answers that she isn't designed to make that choice, perhaps hinting that, like John, Cortana isn't allowed to be all that she can be. I've noted before that the TV show's version of Cortana takes inspiration from the Weapon, the new AI from Halo Infinite. And I'm wondering now if that's true for the character herself. Perhaps, like the Weapon, this Cortana is restricted in some manner. From there, John goes to visit Kai, checking on her while also sharing the truth of the Spartan program and promising to tell Riz and Vanek, quote, when they're ready. I'll be honest, I was a little disappointed that only Riz and Vanek were mentioned, especially since there should still be at least a few more Spartan 2s running around, but oh well. I do appreciate, though, how Kai now calls John by name rather than rank.
John, seen Master Chief?
Halsey, in the meantime, meets with Perengoski and is informed that she'll be removed as the head of the Spartan program, moved to a new lab on Barrier Moons, a new place to my knowledge, where she can continue her other projects and research, while Miranda will be made head of the Spartan program going forward. Over in Maquis' cell, Miranda is taking blood samples, during which Miranda spots her scar. Naturally, Maquis claims it was a result of Covenant torture. Miranda then mentions the attack on the Gladius, noting it was attacked by a corvette like the one Maquis escaped from. Except of course, Maquis escaped from a CCS-class battlecruiser in Episode 5, not a corvette. I'm curious what the story there is. Feeling something off about himself, John heads to a Condor to do another medical scan like we saw in Episode 1. When he does, we can see the scanner was made by a medical division of Misria Armory, the company that produces the Pelican and Condors for the UNSC. When the scan completes, it recommends that John seek immediate medical attention, something Cortana tried to tell him to do more than a few times in the episode so far. Over in Halsey's apartment, we find her and Saley packing things up while being surveyed by a UNSC drone. This one reminds me a bit of the design for the AV-49 Wasp. Saley mentions doing something for Halsey, though not exactly what, and mentions Cortana now being black-boxed and inaccessible. While black box is obviously an appropriate term in this situation, I can't help but wonder if it might be a subtle reference to the smart AI from the core canon known as black box. Called BB for short, the AI was created from the mind of Dr. Graham Albin, a scientist who worked on the Spartan 2 program. Dr. Albin would eventually be overcome with guilt and take his own life, though he did so in a way that would ensure his brain wouldn't be damaged and could be used to create a smart AI. Even among his fellow AI, BB was unique, choosing the form of a cube rather than a human avatar like most AI. Interestingly, when it's mentioned that Cortana was black-boxed, we see Halsey holding a crystal cube. It could all be a coincidence, but I choose to believe otherwise. Meanwhile, we find Silver Team up and about, familiarizing themselves with some new equipment, including a Spartan laser. Around the room, we can spot assault rifles, sniper rifles, M32 DMRs identifiable by the shape of their grip guard, M9 grenades, and an M6 pistol, perhaps an M6H from Halo 4. And yes, the DMR can fire at full auto. I saw some comments about that a while back. It can do that. On screens around the room, we can spot some additional familiar technologies from the games, including an ability module like we see in Halo 5 and Infinite, an M805X thruster pack from Halo 4, and the grapple shot from Halo Infinite. There's also a fourth device on the screens, though I haven't been able to identify it. In the meantime, Miranda makes her way to her new lab, Halsey's old lab. As she does, we finally get a clear look at the Mjolnir armor Halsey has in her lab, one a suit of Mark VI, the other appears to be the same type as Kai's. Miranda sees the room that once held Halsey's clone, though before she can do anything else, a message comes through from Halsey asking to see Miranda. Now, the interaction between Halsey and Miranda is absolutely spectacular. Olive Gray and Natasha McElhone were stellar. And while we learn that Halsey ultimately called Miranda over for her own purposes, I'd like to believe that her apology to Miranda was more than just manipulation. Halsey can be cold, but she isn't inhuman. In terms of Easter eggs, there isn't too much to discuss, though one of Halsey's shelves contains, among other things, what looks like a piece of Sangheili armor, and Master Chief's Mark VI mod helmet from Halo 4. Always good to see the Mark VI mod get some love. Back at her lab, Miranda shows John the results of the blood tests from Maquis, showing that both she and John hold special anomalies in their DNA.
Statistically, you're 2 in a billion.
In light of this information, John goes to see Maquis once more. He informs her that the UNSC wasn't able to find the planet she described, though before questioning can continue, John begins to collapse in pain. When he does, he hits a nearby wall, which I only mention because, well, this is a Spartan, and yet it doesn't seem like anything happened. Spartans are superhuman even outside of their armor, and I feel like John's hit here should have left even some indication of damage. Anyway, seeing him in pain, Maquis begins to explain her own journey with such artifacts, how they showed her visions and caused her pain until she surrendered to the visions. The artifacts started working for her, she explains, going on to say that uniting the two keystones would bring John peace. Back in Halsey's apartment, we find that Cortana has managed to break through Fleetcom's firewalls just as Halsey predicted. Cortana struggles to manifest a bit here, which reminded me, intentionally or not, of the original Cortana animations from Halo CE. When she manifests, Halsey says,
You found me.
which could be a reference to Halo 3.
You found me.
What I really loved, though, was seeing Cortana on a more familiar scale, and on something akin to a holo-tank from core Canon. After a few pleasantries, Halsey asks after John, who we see with Miranda, the two ready to see if Maquis' words hold any truth. As they do, Halsey monitors John's condition with Cortana's help. John touches the artifact once again and it comes to life. In her room, Maquis feels the effects of the artifact as well, going into a seizure. Holding on longer and seeing more visions, John's vitals begin to hit dangerous levels. As this happens, we can see John referred to as a Spartan 2 in this medical readout here. Most of the time, characters and even the marketing just talk about the Spartan program as a singular entity. Anyway, fearing for the Spartan, Cortana requests permission to shut down John for his own safety, but Halsey refuses, saying that she needs to see what happens, much to Cortana's shock. Finally, however, John's vitals stabilize, and we find both him and Maquis in a vision together, the both of them on a halo ring. Weirder still, their vitals are perfectly in sync when this happens. The episode then ends with the Chief coming back to reality and Miranda asking what he saw. And that concludes episode 6 of the TV series. From the beginning, I think we were all wondering when a Halo ring would finally make its first on-screen appearance for the show, and I think the show handled that reveal, that moment, really well. If I had one complaint about the Halo, it's that I would have liked to actually see the other side of the ring when the camera points straight up, just like you can do in the games, but that's a minor thing. I have little doubt that we'll get some breathtaking scenes when the show finally does set foot on a Halo ring. Last week's episode gave the show a rush of action that it's been needing for a little while, and though episode 6 doesn't have any major action set pieces, the show really feels like it's gotten past its early growing pains and is coming into its own. With 3 episodes left in the season, I'm both excited and anxious to see how things will play out. And since this episode was devoid of Quan and Soren, hopefully we can get some real momentum on that storyline soon. I like Soren, and Yaren Ah, the actress who portrays Quan, is a solid actor. The show just hasn't really done much with her since episode 2. Naturally though, these are just my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. That's all for today, and until next time, This has been Halo Canon. Thank you once again for watching Canonites. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, maybe even share it around, both of which help the channel. And if you aren't subscribed already, consider becoming a fellow Canonite and hitting that notification bell so you won't miss any future videos. Halo Canon now has a Discord server, which you can find linked in the description box below. If you like discussing any aspect of Halo's lore, well, that's what we specialize in. Thank you all once more, and keep on being awesome.